Good morning, everyone here in the US, 10 a.m. on the East Coast, and good afternoon to everyone who might be watching in other time zones and other continents. Welcome to my second LinkedIn Live of the year. I made a commitment actually last year that I was going to do better on LinkedIn. And by better, I meant actually leverage its networking power. Because LinkedIn to me reminds me of living in a neighborhood with folks who have lots of garages and basically come home from work. We wave to each other from each other's cars or on from the sidewalk. And then our garage door opens, the car goes in, and we don't probably talk to each other for a long time. Perfect example of that is yesterday. We had a little bit of a snowstorm in my part of the country in New Jersey. And I stepped out to, of course, clean the snow. First time in 2.5 years, I think, I used my snowblower, which is, of course, very relevant to our discussion here today with my guest, Tomi Nyman. Uh, Regardless, I saw my neighbor for the first time probably since the summer and did not realize his daughter's getting married this coming Saturday. So it took a snowstorm for me to actually talk and communicate with someone face to face. So we can't always do that on LinkedIn. But I think LinkedIn Live, also this is available on YouTube, is a great way to leverage social media in a positive way. Uh, Build your network. It's one of the things I've really slated as a goal of mine for this year is to really do a better job of networking. If I was to say one thing I didn't do well as a solo entrepreneur, which I should have done much better the last 14, 15 years, is network more effectively. Of course, network with the right people, with the right mindset, with similarities, and of course differences too, because we learn from those things. Um, but I hope to also share my network with you and the knowledge that these folks that I've met, amazing people like Tomi, who you're going to find out about shortly, and you're able to grow your network, grow your skill set and knowledge base. So what we're going to do is Tomi and I again met on LinkedIn because we have some common interests surrounding climate change and other topics related to our world. Things like compassionate capitalism, too, which we'll get into in a future episode. We had so many things to talk about. We actually are going to have 3 discussions like this. So this is the first of 3. I'm going to bring Tomi on. I would like him to do the introduction of who he is and his background, because I certainly won't do it enough justice. But he is an amazing activist and also an investor. So he puts his money where his mouth is regarding climate. So without further delay, I'm going to bring Tomi on, and I'd love for him to just give us all a brief introduction to his background, and then we'll get into the topic of today, which is water. I love water, Tomi, and I'd like to have more of it, and I'd like for all of us on this planet to have more clean, fresh water. And you're going to raise some alarms, but you're also going to give us some ideas because the headline for you is, in your lifetime, you want to reduce our emissions by 1 gigaton. Simple goal, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But you have not just thrown out this goal, you have a methodology and a plan. And that's really why I want you here, is because I want more people to hear about this. So Tomi, if you could give us a little bit about your background, and then let's get
Sure.
into the topic of the day.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So my name is Tomi Nyman. I have a background chemical engineering from Finnish University of Technology about 20 plus years ago. Since then, I've been working in the chemicals business, in the plastics business, working with systematic solutions to reduce emissions or in otherwise improve our or reduce our environmental impact, basically. So basically, first 10 years, I was selling chemicals. Gradually, I started to realize that we need to focus more on the environmental impact and started to promote more environmentally friendly products. Then through an alumni meeting, I ended up working with Neste and initiated their bioplastics and biochemicals business in 2012. I was there for 5 years, and during that time, I built the business and the strategy to deploy that further. I also initiated Neste's chemical recycling program for the plastics, and basically after 5 years, I realized that I had catalyzed what there was for me to do, and decided to leave the company for other adventures. Soon after, I joined an engineering and consulting company called Pöyry, which is nowadays called AFRY. And there I developed a concept called plastics to bio, which basically explains how we can turn all plastics globally bio-based via extensive recycling. It does require 50 billion investment per year, but at the end of it, we save 300 billion a year in the feedstock. That concept, when calculated through, is environmentally and economically viable, and it also reduces 1 gigaton of CO2 emissions from the plastics value chain. That is where the original target for my headline came from. And I started to, well, initially I didn't sleep for 2 nights, and then I realized that I had to make this my career target. I was in management consulting for a couple of years, after which I decided to become fully an entrepreneur. And today I have my own company, and I have invested into 10 climate, circular economy, bioeconomy startups, working with plastics, working with bio-based products, working with different digital circular economy solutions. As an example, those companies have been one part of my work. The other part is systemic solutions. So I have continued working with those, and for example, developed a food-based systemic solution that enables reducing global emissions by 50 gigatons when implemented correctly. Now, when we talk about gigatons, annual human-based emissions are about 40 gigatons, and natural emissions are about 10 gigatons. So just by changing how we eat and what we eat, how we manage our food, we could save a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere.
So that's a great intro. Again, there's so much more to tell. But what I really want to impress on everyone is, LinkedIn, of course, is a kind of considered to be a business networking site, a business social platform. And everything you just stated there, right, is, of course, raising points about climate change. But just because we're climate activists or you're a climate activist does not mean that you're not a businessman or a capitalist.
That's
right? And so that's a very important, I think, takeaway from our first discussion was here's somebody who is not just going out there and saying, well, let's just shut everything down, right? And go back to horse and buggy, or even before that, just walk. You're proposing solutions that cut our emissions, right? Not zero them out, because that's impractical. Now, the measures that we have to take are going to be difficult. But today's topic is a little bit, is of course adjacent to overall climate change. And so I'm just going to share with everyone what it is we're going to talk about today. Very briefly, we're going to talk about water. So I love water. We all love water. We love having it handy. But you have some interesting new perspectives that I really appreciated you sharing. Which is basically the lack of clouds, which is something that I guess, most of us appreciate as, wow, look at this beautiful blue sky, without realizing that it could be a signal, right? Because Mother Nature has been sending us signals for many, many years. And some of us listen, some of us don't. Some of us enjoy it. So every benefit of a cloudless day, there is something else we have to be aware of. It affects our water. You're going to talk about acidification, and you talk about plankton, which is something that I know in the U.S., especially in states like Florida, between plankton and other life forms growing in the water that it should not normally be in, we've got some serious alarms to raise. So why don't we start with just the initial topic, which is kind of new, is about the lack of water. And what could be causing it, among the many causes.
Yeah. So basically, it is not that recent. These topics have been in the research media for several years now. But basically, clouds are generated by nucleation agents, aerosols, that collect moisture into droplets of water in the atmosphere. These aerosols that act as the nucleating agent, they are formed today in the nature by, first of all, trees, and secondly, by plankton in the oceans. Both of them emit these aerosols, and then clouds are formed. Now, during the last 600 years, roughly, humans have been cutting trees in order to build houses, build ships, burn for heat and energy, for mining purposes, for paper, you name it, in order to create farmland, etc., in order to grow something else. In addition, we have been polluting our waters with, in terms of industry. We have been putting a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere, which causes the acidification of our oceans. And all the pollution and the acidification together have led to the fact that plankton in the oceans has reduced dramatically. The reduction in the central areas around the equator is already up to 90%, and in the northern and southern parts, it's about 50%. Now, plankton and trees, they generate all the oxygen that we breathe. We have destroyed half of our forests in terms of numbers of trees in these 600 years, and we have destroyed about half of the plankton. So what are we going to breathe when there is no more plankton, basically, or trees? Now,
so just a quick question. In the US, we're experiencing something in Florida called red algae, right?
Yeah.
Which is, you know, on the surface, you would think, oh, algae must be good, right? It's natural,
yeah.
but it's not good. It's doing tremendous harm, actually, in the areas that it's appearing.
Now there are macroalgae and there are microalgae. Now, plankton there are two main types of plankton. There are the kind of plant-like algae that are consisting of cellulose generated from carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. And then there are animal-type plankton, which are small animals that have a crustacean shell, like calcium carbonate shell. Now, these two both are two classes of plankton that are microalgae. Then we have a lot of macroalgae, like the red algae, sargassum, etc., that are causing a lot of trouble on the coasts. Now, that is due to eutrophication. That then is a reason. The reason for that is mainly an excess nitrogen and excess phosphorus in the waters, sweet waters ending up in the oceans. We are basically dumping too much nutrients from agriculture and from cities into the ocean, and that is causing this eutrophication. Coming back to the aerosols. Now, the plankton and the trees, they create the aerosols that create the clouds. Now, 3-4 years ago, sulfur was banned in shipping fuels. And this was forecasted 20 years ago that this is going to happen when sulfur is banned. But now it was proven that clouds have disappeared. For example, in Finland, in December and January, typically we don't see the sun. But this year we had many sunny days. Last week, we had 5 or 6 sunny days in February, and that is not typical for Finland. We are used to having cloud cover in winter, but now we're seeing the sun every day. If you think about Southern Europe, even Central Europe, the rivers are dry. There is no rain for agriculture, for crops, for industry, for drinking water. There is not enough snow on the Alps in order to generate water into the rivers. If this continues a few years forward, Europe, as an example, will have serious trouble in water management. in terms of feeding people and in terms of getting enough water to drink. The US is experiencing a similar thing in California already, with a lot of drought in the States.
Yeah, I mean, it's good that you point out the challenges being faced on the mainly southwest part of the U.S., but rivers are running dry. Tremendous amount of expense is being put out to transport water
Yep.
to dry and desert areas. Unfortunately, in some cases, it's being used to feed golf courses and keep the grass green, which is kind of low on the, based on everything you're saying, right, is low on the list of priorities.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, I living in the Northeast, our most convenient and nice place to go skiing or snowboarding is Vermont, within reasonable distance to where I am. I've been going probably for about 30 years. And in the last 10 years, I've probably gone about 4 or 5 times. And I remember how it was 30 years ago. You go there in December or March, and it's just lovely powdered snow. There's always
Yeah.
a blizzard. The last several times I've only gone the week of Christmas, and I've noticed that it's either ice or very, very light, heavy, light snow. No blizzards yet. And this past Christmas in 2023, we went, and they actually had to cancel some of our events because everything was either just barren and mud, or it was ice that was a little too dangerous. And so someone I know I mentioned this to said, well, you can always go to Utah or Colorado. I said, well, that's not really solving the root cause of what's happening
No.
here. That's just burning a little more fuel to fly out west, which may even make things worse. So I feel bad for the people up there because economies depend on water and snow. So where are we going to, I mean, I just visited Europe this past summer. I don't know as much about water scarcity. Where is it occurring? In the north, in southern Europe, Eastern Europe? Where is it
Especially,
really affecting people?
yeah, especially in the south. So I, as child, I used to live in Spain for 8 years, and having talked to my friends there and my family, my parents are still there. The scarcity is really dramatic. They are limiting showers. You're not allowed to shower. There is no water for swimming pools. There's no water for gardening. There's no water for any other purpose except for drinking. They've been praying for rain, but every time there is a forecast for rain, for some reason, it doesn't come. This is really a hurdle in not only in the south of Spain. It is a hurdle in the northern parts of Spain. There, the industry is struggling from lack of water. Italy had a lot of trouble last year in the northern parts where they're growing rice. They were not able to plant rice because of the lack of water. So it is a serious issue.
So I think you bring up an interesting point, and these are, advanced nations that you're talking about.
Yes.
Here in the U.S., a lot of people have, of course, immigration is a big issue globally right now.
Yep.
Many countries, of course, in Europe, because of things in the Middle East, are facing challenges, and in the U.S., facing challenges in Central America, right? And one of the contributing factors is scarcity of water.
Yep.
People are not able to grow food that they either used for themselves or sold to make a living. So there's no way for them to either eat or make a living. And so they're escaping conditions. There are other factors, of course, public safety and violence, of course, political unrest. But all of this can really, what makes people unstable or can cause people to be unhappy is a lack of water, which results in a lack of food and other resources. Can make people want to run away and escape and show up at the borders of
Yeah.
various countries around the world. So while we talk about war, which of course is a major contributing factor, what you're describing to me is, of course, sounding like if we just substituted water and put the word oil in there, we could be talking about the same issues and implications.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if you
Um,
think about Barcelona, Barcelona is running on a desalination plant. There is no natural water.
So that's news to me, probably
Yeah,
news to a lot of my friends and folks who are watching this who have visited Spain. Spain has become very attractive for
yeah,
tourism over the last decade or so. And so now you're telling us that Spain is operating off of desalination, which is an extremely expensive process, very energy intensive. Normally, I used to work on desalination equipment. It was for the middle, for Saudi Arabia
yeah,
and countries in that region. It's when you're surrounded by water, right? That's the other myth that people have to
mm,
understand that yes, the planet is mostly water. And when we look at it from space, we see blue. And so the question is always, well, there's water, right?
yeah,
What's the big deal here? Why are we even talking about this? And so I think you're laying out in practical terms that the water is not of good enough quality for us, for humanity,
yeah,
to survive and to thrive, of course. But right now, we're, I think, talking about just surviving, and
yeah.
thriving
We
is,
can't. Yeah, we
yeah,
can't drink salt water, so that is the
ex-
issue. Yeah,
exactly. And so desalinization, again, while a wonderful, let's say, emergency solution, is
mm,
not a long-term solution, probably simply because of how expensive and energy intensive it is. Um,
exactly.
so what can we do, right? I mean, the final two things I wanted to cover, and of course cover other items as well, because I want to make sure everyone understands this albedo effect because it was new to me.
Yeah.
Um, but as you do that, I want to know what are we doing, what can we do globally, and also if there are any interests at your firm, November. November.fi, by the way, is where you can learn more about Tomi and his firm and his some of his investments too. But what can we do globally to impact this problem that we face?
Now let's talk about albedo and Earth energy imbalance. Uh, Albedo is basically the whiteness that is seen from the space created by clouds and glaciers and on ice. Now, that has been reducing because of the lack of the clouds. So what happens then is that the Earth is absorbing an excess amount of solar heat because it appears dark to the sun. We have dark forests, we have dark oceans. If there is no cloud cover, if there is no ice cover, the Earth appears dark, and that has caused the Earth energy imbalance to increase dramatically. So during the last 36 months, 3 years, the average absorption of the Earth has been equivalent to 13 12.8 Hiroshima bombs per second in terms of energy. Now that is massive. That energy is being captured not only into the soil, but into the water. Especially the Northern Atlantic has been suffering and heating up. There's been a lot of ship traffic in the Northern Atlantic that has kept it covered by clouds. Now those sulfur emissions from ships are gone. There are no natural aerosols, so the energy is being trapped into the ocean.
So let me do this because I'm shocked at that number, right? You said 12 or 13 Hiroshima bombs. What is the time frame again? That
Per second,
ended
every second,
every second.
every
We're
second,
and
globally.
do we have any idea of the trend? Say 10 years ago, what would it have been, or 20 years ago, roughly, maybe
It
longer, when
has
it
it has more than quadrupled.
quadrupled? Okay,
Yes.
so if we're noticing things changing rapidly, you just gave us one reason why. And for those of us who have been paying attention to the white space and the reduction in white space, thank you for connecting it to this effect, right?
Yeah.
And also giving us some context of order of magnitude. it's extremely disturbing and obviously harmful to the oceans as well as to the lands that the
Yeah,
oceans surround.
yeah,
So once we know this, we've known this for a while. Many people know this. Many people like you, experts in the area, know it. What are some of the things being done to positively impact this? Because I know that having read a lot of your posts on LinkedIn recently, especially, you are still an optimist, right? You're an investor because you're an optimist.
yeah,
You
yeah,
can't invest in something that's, you're not going to invest in a candle that you know eventually is going to run out of wax and wick.
yeah.
So you're investing because you see an opportunity here for growth, for sustainable growth. So what is happening globally to kind of follow that trend?
Now, we will be touching the topic further in some of our next calls. But for example, replacing linear consumption with circular economy solutions will dramatically reduce the excess need to produce new products. Now, every time we produce a new product, we generate emissions. We need energy for that. We can do a lot of systemic changes in our society that enable us to save energy. If we think about insulation as an example, that's a good part. 1 billion people insulate their homes and offices in the world. 7 billion don't. Those 7 billion people live in places where they actually burn something to generate energy, electricity, to run an air conditioning machine. That doesn't make sense. They create heat to create cool. We have a lot of those systemic laziness or lazy systems in our society that we could change to reduce the emissions that we generate.
And what about obviously water, whatever you're describing, right? Water is required in almost all cases to generate electricity, to produce food, to produce apparel. So what I think you're saying in tying this to water specifically, right, is that
Yeah,
the more we consume, the more water is not available for human consumption, fresh water,
yeah,
let's say,
that's
for
right.
human consumption, and more water is actually even a power plant, right? For decades since the first power plants started to dominate the landscape. What's been the biggest concern? Where does the runoff go? The hot water that comes off a power plant, and what is it doing to marine life, right? It's only probably in the last 25 to 30 years that we've actually enacted policy to address that issue. But that water is returning into an ecosystem that was not meant to take water at a certain temperature, right?
Yeah,
That just came off as condensate from steam. So, making less, I think is, like you said, we're going to talk about it more because our next two topics are going to be about the subject of degrowth. And we're going to talk about also compassion and human psychology, right?
yeah,
Because we can't talk about this subject of water, which is like really easy, right?
yeah,
Should be really easy, without then talking about like how do we think about water. So globally there's things happening. I know individually there are things we can do, right, about
yeah,
water.
yeah,
So I'd love to hear your thoughts, right? This is where hopefully it's most useful to folks that are watching this, because we can keep talking about the gigaton issue, right?
mm,
But what about my role in that? Because one of the beliefs I have is everyone should do their small bit, because otherwise trying to do everything can get overwhelming, right? No,
yeah.
it's a terrible pun, but it's very applicable. We can't boil the ocean, although unfortunately we slowly are. Uh,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
We are the
Tell me.
frogs that don't manage to leap out early enough.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
so what can we do individually as consumers, as parents, as children, to make our water situation ever so slightly better?
Very simple things. Extend product life. we have, when it comes to, for example, textiles, every single person on average in Europe and the US has more than 200 pieces of apparel and clothes. We don't need to buy as many as we are doing. The sustainable quantity would be roughly somewhere between 2 and 3, maximum 5 new pieces of textile every year. I'm wearing a watch which dates back from 1958. This is my only watch that never has required any repair. It doesn't have a battery. It runs on its own. I just need to wind it every morning. I have 9 other watches inherited and bought, but they are lazy because they need battery change or maintenance. Why
So
am I use? I mean, these are easy examples.
they are simple, they are easy examples. And you mentioned a little bit, you're talking about watches, which are, of course, part of fashion. I have a question from someone. And the question is specifically on fashion,
Yeah.
because a few weeks ago I visited what's called the Manhattan Vintage Show, and I bought some vintage clothing. My wife bought some vintage clothing, beautiful clothing. And I think you and I talked about the subject of fashion a little bit, about
Yeah.
thrifting and reusing and recycling. What is the impact? Because fashion industry is very active on sustainability. They've been
Mhm.
kind of guilted into, yes, paying people a fair wage, and also not destroying the planet. So what is the impact you see of the fashion industry, and where can we all make a difference in that space, in addition to buying watches or using watches that are wind up?
Yeah. Basically, as an example, I repair my own clothes because I just want to extend the product life. There's a lot of small companies, startups working on the resale of branded fashion goods, as an example. There are a lot of recycling centers for resale, secondhand clothes, web shops, etc., arising. Those are definitely very good because, as an example, cotton, of course, has been lowering in quality because of the uh, excess cultivation, excess demand, and we need to start to extend the product life of not only cotton but also our synthetic textiles. And that's I would really love to see the brands also establishing secondhand shops or secondhand shelves in their stores to really boost the sales of used clothes. And if you think
So
about the safety, one thing about the safety, uh, brand new textiles often contain a lot of toxic chemicals, PFAS chemicals, for example, forever chemicals. A used textile has been washed and it's much safer in that perspective. What do you want to, what do you want, safe chemicals or safe textile or toxic chemicals to touch your skin? That's a good question.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of instances, right, where we don't realize what we're surrounding ourselves with. There's nothing like a new car smell, right?
Oh, yeah,
Then
terrible
you
chemicals.
then you find out the new car smell is actually a flame retardant, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And of course, it's a good idea to have it. There's some safety, but to your point, are there better ways to provide that safety? Are there better solutions? I think car companies have, of course, recognized this because
yeah,
consumers have recognized it. So individually, we can practice a lot of discipline with our clothing. Vintage fashion means that old stuff is actually kind of cool stuff.
exactly.
um, and individually we have to start to prioritize what is important to us, because shiny and new is always exciting,
Yeah,
but then we really need to understand the depth of its implications, specifically as we talked about today on water, what type of food we consume. And I know we're going to get into that a lot in the a little bit of the second episode, and definitely the third episode. The third episode, I think, is going to be important, folks, because Tommy is going to talk about a lot of these things that are about individual habits too, and our psychology. What has kept people from believing in this? I think, I don't know, Tommy, if I sent you one of my favorite but scariest movies is The Day After Tomorrow.
yeah.
Um, where essentially the weather, the climate falls off a shelf, right?
And
We don't see that.
we are very close to it, actually.
We and that's why I think I sent that to you. I said, you
Yeah,
had written about something else, and we see in the US, for instance, we see a mudslide in California because of rain. We see a tornado in Mississippi. We see hurricane in Florida, and we see a blizzard in Buffalo, a deadly blizzard in Buffalo. They may not all occur at the same time. Some of them may occur at the same time, but we still treat them as disparate events, say that happened 40 years ago, 30 years ago. But
yeah,
if you look at a lot of analysis, these events are occurring more frequently. They're occurring together more often. For instance, our fire situation on the West Coast, where it used to be a few days a year, now is becoming a majority of days of the year. We have some type of fire because of dry land and dry forest. So I'm not one to push the panic button normally, but the last few years I have pushed the panic button, and we should panic. We should actually be genuinely
we sh-
worried,
yeah,
but we should not look at it as a defeat. I think again, I want to point out the fact that you're an investor. You showed me that cool product the other day, which was the plastic.
yeah,
Uh, that was made from cellulose, which is
yeah.
obtained from a tree
That's right.
from so there's a lot of opportunity, but it does require investment. It does require some patience, some understanding, and you brought up a great word, lazy. You can't be lazy, right? These problems can't
No,
be solved um, by being lazy. And so Tomi, I want to I want to thank you for joining me for this first episode. Is there anything else you'd like to share about water specifically before
yes,
we part? Go
yes. Just in the last days, it's been in the news. The Atlantic meridional overturning circulation is very close to its tipping point. That means that basically, according to a calculation by a leading climate scientist, Leon Simons, during the last 50 years or so, the Earth has absorbed about 450 zettajoules of excess energy. That means that on an annual basis, we are absorbing roughly the amount of energy that is needed to melt enough ice from Greenland to stop the Gulf current from flowing. That can happen any year, basically. We are really on the verge of stopping the Gulf current from flowing. Now, that would mean the northern part of Europe, Scandinavia, UK, would end up covered in ice within about 25 years. It will be very quick. It will mean that New York will be flooded because the water on the East Coast water level will increase by 2 meters. That is a very dramatic and a very fast change that can happen during our lifetime. The way to change this is really to promote the conservation of oceans, the protection of oceans, the restoration of oceans. We need to allow for more plankton growth in the oceans because they are the ones that are controlling the heat and the currents, enabling the return of the power of the Gulf currents and the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation.
So I think this brings us back to the point of life may imitate art as opposed to the other way around, and we certainly want to avoid that. But everyone should be aware of the practical implications on us, and you just described it: flooding in New York and Boston Harbor and places near and dear to me, I know, and then ice shifting location. It sounds like
Yeah,
from melting caps in the north to freezing people in civilized parts of the world or populous parts of the world. And so, Tomi, I think this worked out just like most of my meetings do. They are most impactful in the last 5 minutes. I think what you just said I'm going to make sure people definitely watch all the way to the end, because I think that might be the most impactful part of this thing. That, and learning that we're absorbing the oceans are absorbing 13 Hiroshima bombs a second worth of energy, which is an alarming number in any period of time. So, Tomi, thank you so much. I knew we would definitely need more than 30 minutes for this discussion. And that's why we're doing 3 discussions on related topics. And I appreciate your time, folks. Tomi can be found on LinkedIn, of course. Tomi Nyman. He's a great follow. And also, he was kind enough to reach out to me when I contacted him, because I think, his point of view, his perspective is, I'm an engineer, so I appreciate data-backed and scientifically supported theories and concepts. And a lot of it's not theory. A lot of it is happening today. It's behind us, actually, right? The best.
Yes.
Someone asked me the other day, what was the best year for us to take, when's the best time for us to take action on climate change? And I said 1982. And I stand by that statement. So, Tomi, thank you so much. Everyone who is out there watching, I really appreciate your attention. I know it's early in the workday for many, or middle of. This will be available on YouTube for as long as Google is around. And it will also be on LinkedIn in the archives. So I'll share that link with everyone later. Please feel free to share it with your friends and family, and especially children, because they are most impacted by all of this. Tomi, have a great evening in Finland. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Take care.
Thank you.